Good morning everybody, or good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar, which is working with annotations. So that was another new feature that we added in Capture One 11, and that's what we're going to be looking at today, as long as another feature which we kind of snuck in, which is assets as layers. So we'll look at that as well. If this is your first time listening and you don't know who you're listening to, my name's David. I'm part of the software sales team based out of Copenhagen in Denmark. And as usual, we have 60 minutes to go, but we won't need all of that for today's subject. This morning we wrapped it up in about 25 minutes, so it's relatively simple to get your head around, so we won't spend any more time than is necessary. You're very welcome and encouraged to ask questions throughout. If you look at the bottom of your GoToWebinar control panel, you'll see the last section is called questions. Put one in there and that will come straight through to me. And if you're on your iOS device or Android device, you'll see a question mark icon on screen. Tap that and you can ask a question in the same way. I am recording it too, and you can pick that up on YouTube tomorrow, and that will probably be on there around lunchtime. So, okay, so you should be able to see Capture One on screen right now, and the mouse could be highlighted like that from time to time. So first thing to talk about is annotations, and the whole point of annotations is either to use it in a collaborative workflow. So if you're working with a team like yourself and a retoucher or stylist or client or something like that, and you need to communicate visually to that person without having to email them, speak to them, write notes or whatever. The idea being that you can note directly on the image. Additionally, if you're not working with someone else, if you're not collaborating, then it could be a way to note to yourself or give yourself a reminder for something in the future. Anyway, annotations are treated as metadata, so that's why you'll find them right here in the metadata tool tab, and it's a very simple tool. It has two cursors, a draw annotations cursor and a raise annotations cursor, 6 colors, side slider, and a checkbox to turn them on and off. So to use this image as an example, if I was in a situation where I wanted to collaborate with a retoucher, and I'm certainly not going to retouch myself, for example, then we could pick the Draw Annotations tool, grab a color, and right click on the image. You can bring up the same panel, just so you know. And then as you make the cursor bigger and smaller, you see the circle represents how big your annotation is going to be. Sure, that's pretty obvious, but it's worth pointing out. So then I could communicate to the retoucher by saying, well, I want these kind of background blemishes fixed, for example, like so. If we just zoom in a little bit, remembering that we have 6 colors to choose from, you could define your own kind of, what's the word? Legend or code or whatever for how you want to communicate. There is no hard and fast rules about what you want to do, but in this case we could use blue, for example, as an indication that there's some exposure areas that need fixing, like so. I'm going to post a blog post on our blog, blog.phase1.com, early January, and that's got a couple of examples about various different markup language you could use. So for example, if we wanted to get rid of this, probably a bit too big, let's right click and make it smaller, and then we could do SB for spot blemish, or we could talk about adding certain colors like add yellow, add cyan, and so on. But however you want to do it, of course, is entirely up to you. If you want to get rid of your annotations, it's pretty simple. You just grab the annotation, erase annotations cursor, and then just swipe over the annotations and they disappear. Of course, I can multiple undo as well if that was a mistake. So I'm sure you can agree that's pretty simple. Let me just add one more for fun. Let's grab the red and just say we got a wrinkly shirt and we want to fix that. If you want to see the annotations, they always show up when you have either of the annotations cursor tools selected. If I went to the hand tool and this wasn't checked, then my annotations disappear. Remember, it doesn't affect the actual pixels of the image. That would be a bit sad if it did. So it's just like a floating layer, if you like. There's a new button in the Capture One 11 default workspace which toggles the annotations on and off, like so. And that's simply the same as ticking the tick box. If you don't see it, you can right click and say Customize Toolbar, and then you'll find it over here on the left, like so. Same for Windows as well, exactly the same procedure for Windows too. So that's the easy part. So I'm sure all of you can pretty much understand how that works. Now the next part, of course, is the whole collaboration side of things. So what do we do now if we want to communicate this to our retoucher? So a couple of choices. If we wanted to send the raw file, if the retoucher or whoever else has access to Capture One, and we want to give them the raw file with our adjustments and the annotations, the easiest way to do that is with an EIP file. So File, Export Images, Originals, note the shortcut. Let's just choose a folder to put them. I'll just tuck them into Pictures. And we're going to tick this option, Pack as EIP. So that's raw data and all the other adjustments. So let's just export that and see what happens. Nothing very dramatic is going to happen, of course. If I just bring up the Finder, and then you can just see what the file type looks like. So Pictures, you can see there it is, an EIP file. So if we were to send that to someone in whatever method you wish, they could open that up into Capture One and see the annotations and your adjustments and move on from there. But if we're sending it and they don't have access to Capture One, then we have a couple of other choices. So if we go into our process recipes, let's delete these ones from earlier and make them again. And then that way we can show you exactly what's going to happen. So let's make a new process recipe, and we're going to call this Annotations PSD. PSG, PSD, that's better. First thing that we've got to do is change this to PSD format. Currently that's the only format we have that supports the annotations as a layer. And I'll say open with Photoshop. And if we go to metadata, remember that the annotations were metadata, so that's where we're going to find it. We can say let's have annotations as a layer. And that's all we need to do. And just make sure it's 8-bit, not 16-bit. And let's process this one out. Could not process file. Why is that? The output folder could not be. Let's choose a folder then in that case. I did that on purpose so you can see what's happening. If you ever get an event come up, that was quite handy. If you ever get an event and it has something weird that you don't understand, just click on it and then you'll get a reason why. And that's often a lot more helpful than just the description. So whenever this panel pops up, do have a look, okay? Because then normally it will help you solve the problem. So now if we process, off we go. So that's good. And that should open straight up into Photoshop when it's finished. Harwell says, why 8-bit instead of 16? It'll work with 16 just fine, but for the purpose of this demonstration, I didn't think you'd want to wait the extra 30 seconds that it would take to create it, but there's no reason why you can't do 16-bit as well. Sorry if that wasn't clear. So there we have our image in Photoshop, and you can see over on the right hand side we have our annotations layer, which we can turn off, of course, and turn on. So if we're using our annotations for retouch, we can see them, we can review, and then we can obviously discard it once we're done with our retouching process. Brian says, is there plans for supporting other formats? Possibly, I don't know, in terms of sort of the time we had and everything. It made the most sense to do it on a PSD format, being the most universally used format for this kind of thing, but there's probably no reason why it couldn't be added to other formats, but I can't say for sure if it will be added or not. Could we make annotations on different layers? I guess we could, but then you'd need some mechanism in Capture One to tell you what layer you want it on, and then it's probably getting a bit complicated. So I'd be surprised if something like that came along. Incidentally, somebody asked this morning, will this file open in Affinity as well? I just downloaded the trial to give it a go, and yes, it will. So it opens just fine in Affinity too. Okay, now if we chose JPEG, for example, James was asking this earlier, we can still have our annotations. Let's just process this quickly. It should open up in Photoshop as well. But of course it's going to be baked into the file. So it's going to open up in a second. So there's our JPEG, but of course I can't get rid of the annotations, so it's less useful, but it is entirely possible. Alrighty, so annotations, sure you will get that concept, pretty simple, but what about assets as layers? So here we have some cute monkeys from one of our ambassadors, Martin Bailey, and we've got a couple of new things that also help the collaboration process, not necessarily for retouchers, but it could be with yourself or with clients and so on. So I've got a fake magazine cover which I've drag and dropped into my overlay tool, and if you haven't used this before, this is great for fitting images to packaging, to magazines, or if you're doing composite work. So drag and drop any image in here and say show, and then it will pop up on screen. We can pick this pan tool and move it around. We can also make it bigger and smaller and so on. So let's say we were going to have a magazine cover like so. Let's, oh, not opacity, it's just a bit too big. Let's make it slightly smaller, and I'm also going to throw a crop in there as well. So let's crop to my Capture One magazine title. So we do something like that. So just to give us an idea of how that magazine cover could look if we did it in real life, of course. Now you might want to carry that through to your client, as I said, or whatever, and it just means that you can see the image fits well, or do you need to recrop or scale or whatever. So that's an asset as a layer. So if we go back to our process recipes and let's say asset as layer, like so, and we're going to have PSD again, go to metadata. We don't have any annotations this time, but we could, if we did have, we could turn that on in the same way. We can now say overlay as layer, like so. And another handy thing we can do, probably for retouchers or yourself if you're doing additional retouching work, is in the adjustments tab you'll find crop to path. So we've got ignore crop, which means that the crop won't be respected and just discarded, and the full image is exported. Then we have crop to path, which means you still get all the image real estate. So that's going to be everything that you see here, but the crop will be represented as a path. So let's, oh, actually there's another asset as a layer. We can also do a watermark as a layer. So image or text, so let's do text. So I could type freehand in here. So this is Martin's image. So I could type Martin Bailey, for example, or I can use a token. And if you haven't got into the aspect of tokens in Capture One, it's a feature that pops up in import areas, process areas, naming conventions, all kinds of things. And it also pops up as a watermark. So I think Martin was smart and he put his copyright information in the metadata, in the copyright notice field. So what I can do is just ask Capture One to call up the copyright notice token, like so, and then it will just pull from that metadata entry. Now that's a bit big, so let's make that smaller. 300 a little on the big side. Let's go for 96, and let's change color to black so we can see it. And let's have the opacity up, and we can grab our pan tool here and just put that wherever we like. So now we've got two different assets as layers. So we've got our overlay and we've got our watermark. Let me check I'm on PSD. Let's say open with Photoshop, and let's process this one out. While that's happening, Seth, hi Seth, was asking, where is the annotations data stored? It's stored in the, if you're using a catalog, it's stored in the catalog. If you're using a session, then it will be stored in the folder that sits alongside those images. If you export an EIP like you saw I did earlier, then that will be part of the EIP format as you saw. Seth says, will using annotations with a large catalog increase the catalog file size dramatically? No, it's only basic vector information, so no, it won't. And if once you've used the annotations, if you wanted to discard them, oh, that's what I didn't show you, I don't think. If you wanted to reset all annotations, we would just, oh, let's turn off GQ. I mean CO, not GQ. If you want to reset all annotations, you can just hit reset, and then they all go away, like so. Let's go back to Photoshop. And Tim says, what's the command key combo to override a preset crop portion while cropping? Do we have one, Tim? I didn't know we did. It could actually be Shift, I think. So if we have, let's just set it to 1:2. And then if we crop, it pops. If I press Shift, I don't think we have one, Tim, unless you know something I don't. Yeah, I think if you have an aspect ratio set, then you just have to go to unconstrained. If you find it, Tim, let me know. That would actually be a really good feature. Let's see. Could I add, William is saying, could I add annotations in Photoshop with a brush? You could, if you wanted to annotate in Photoshop on a layer, then it won't get flattened when you look at it in Photoshop. You won't be able to turn them on and off, but you'll see them. Remember, it's two different things. The way that we're adding the annotations won't be the same as Photoshop. Does asset as a layer work if you file, edit in PS and not use a process recipe? Not quite sure what you mean by that, Janelle. Does asset as layer work if you file it? I think probably you're saying what William is saying. If you want to go, like if we had layers here as an overlay, could we then turn that on and off in Capture One? No, because remember we're not looking at the raw file here, we're looking at a Photoshop file. If we bring that Photoshop file back into Capture One, you're going to see it as it looks on screen now, but you won't have access to the overlay because you're looking at a Photoshop file, not a raw file in a Capture One catalog or session. Two different things. Okay, so now you can see in Photoshop, for example, we've got our various different overlays. So overlay like so, watermark, and everything. And once again, you could just discard that when necessary. But the really handy thing is, if we go to our Paths tab, you can see that's listed as Crop Capture One. So if I tap on that, that shows me a path as my crop was. Let's just turn my overlay back on so you can see it matches as it did in Capture One. And then if I'm happy, if I need to do some retouching and grab some extra image real estate from elsewhere I can, then I can turn my crop into a selection and then simply say, where is it? I thought it was edit, image crop, like so. And there we go. So that's a couple of little things like that. Being able to respect the crop or ignore it is really powerful. And also for retouchers, as some of you may well be doing that, also in adjustments, you can disregard sharpening as well, disable all. So that would just turn off all sharpening in Capture One, which is another handy thing to do if you've got a lot of post-processing work. Cheryl thinks they're asking if they set the asset up, then open the image in Photoshop, not using a process recipe, the layers will show. Yeah, you've got to use a process recipe, or you've got to say, let's just fix my wonky crop. Let's just unconstrain that for a second. like so. We could say file, export images, variants. I don't know if we added it here. Let's check. PSD, metadata, yes. So you can do it that way. So you don't have to use a process recipe if you don't want to. It's just a lot more efficient to use process recipes because you can always go back to it, and you know as soon as you click on it that everything is set up to give you a Photoshop file with your annotations. Change that back. You know, with the process recipe it's set up as a Photoshop file to give you your annotations as a layer. So I hope that makes sense. Bringing a Photoshop file that you made from Capture One back into Capture One won't then give you the ability to go back to the annotations and turn it on and off. It's two very different things. So I hope that makes sense. Murray says, is it possible to access the metadata to delete the annotations no longer used? I guess if you hacked the file and found the metadata tag, you could, but I don't expect many people would need to do that. Excuse me. Easiest way would be just to go back to Capture One and reset the various different things. There we go. I said it was quick. That was 4 minutes faster than this morning, but I think you'll agree it's a pretty simple concept to get your head around. Just in summary, remember annotations is metadata, 2 cursor tools, draw and erase, 6 different colors and a slider. Don't forget you can right click to get those up as well. Remember that it's only PSD where you can have the annotations as a layer, and you'll find that in the metadata as under the workflow tab, annotations as layer. And yes, as James asked, we could have a JPEG, but then that will be baked in the file. Same goes if you're using the overlay tool. Let's turn that back on. That once again in your process recipe, if we're using a PSD file, that we can have our overlay as a layer as well, and our watermark also as a layer, whether that's image or text. And don't forget, crop to path, very useful as well. Okay, how about layered TIFFs? Bob is asking. Not currently. That could be something we could add in the future, but I can't tell you if and when it's going to come. Gary says, to clarify, a retoucher could not edit and annotate and return the file. Yes, they could, because if you've sent them the EIP file, which is the raw data, you could send that to the retoucher. They could scribble on it with the annotations tool and send it back to you if they wanted to. So yes, they could do that. No reason why not to. And if I bring up this slide to bring up what's going to happen next week, that's definitely going to be 60 minutes. This is another sort of expansion of what was possible with local adjustments in Capture One 10, which is now expanded further into Capture One 11 by adding a couple of tools which were missing from local adjustments. Excuse me, and also adding an opacity slider on each layer and having great additions to adjust the mask with refine mask and feather mask. And an improvement of the color editor tool goes hand in hand with that and means you can do a whole lot more with layers and color edits. So that's definitely going to be an interesting one for next week, and a bit more in depth than something as simple as drawing on an image. So hope you can join me for that. If you look out for your follow-up email tomorrow, then there'll be a link in there actually to join that webinar, and it would be great to see you. When you exit, you'll also get access to a survey as well. If you can fill that in, that would be nice too. All right, many thanks for your attention today. I said it was nice and simple, and hope to see you again in the future. Take care, everyone, and see you soon. Bye now.